Yeah. So, so it is exactly good afternoon. So, good afternoon, all of you. Today, I would like to share my understanding and my learning on the selected theme of changing scenarios and social innovations with respect to social work in India. So, the outline of today's presentation would be like this. First, I would like to just brief upon on what social work and social innovation is and how they are connected. And then I will proceed forward towards looking at the changing scenario in India, especially with respect to social innovations in social organizations that usually employ social workers and development practitioners. Followed by which I would enter into an arena that is largely describing one model to deal with complexities when we look at present day social work and social innovations, and that is the adaptive innovation model. So when we look at social work, I mean, I presume that many of you here who are here already understand the various definitions of social work, etc. But to draw the connections between the various professions and fields of practice, I thought that let me begin by describing some of the few characteristics of social work. Yes, we all understand that it is practice based. It is also today grounded as one of the very enriching academic discipline in India and across the globe, which caters towards various aspects like social change, development practice, social cohesion, empowerment of the marginalized, liberation of people. And one of the key characteristics of social work profession is that it adheres to the principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and also respecting diversity. Well, we have borrowed a lot from different disciplines like different types of social sciences, humanities. At the same time, we have also paused ourselves, walked slowly to respect and recognize the indigenous knowledge that is emerging from different marginalized communities, trying to learn from the local knowledge systems and then change practice, bring about changing practices. And context specificity is yet another characteristics of the recent social work practices, which recognizes the importance of the local, the importance of the context, which is being affected by various social, economic, political, and ecological features. So, if this is so, what is social innovation then? So, social innovation, when we talk about social innovation, one important aspect that comes to is something new, a novel solution. Yes, it need not be always novel, but that solution that we are suggesting to a social problem needs to be more effective, efficient, sustainable than what was previously there. So, we are talking about coming out with solutions to address social problems in a way that it not only addresses an individual but a larger collective or public good, and at the same time we address that in a better way, in a much efficient way in terms of resources, participation, etc. So this is from the definition of Fields et al. That we get this definition of social innovation. But what are the key features of social innovation that exactly makes it more transformative? What is that feature of social innovation that contributes to transformative social change, and which is very important for us to understand? Otherwise, whatever we do, we can claim it as social innovation. So, one is says social innovation has to address the basic human need that we are trying to address. There is the human need component in it. It has to aim to empower individuals and groups. So the social innovation, what we are talking about, should have the potential of empowerment by changing existing power structures, social structures, by enabling the marginalized, the poor, the vulnerable to access resources. At the same time, what we do in a particular local area need not be always situated in that particular context. Is there a potential for replicating or taking this innovation, adapting it to another context, or upscaling and institutionalization of these innovations? But at the same time, social innovations at any point of time has to be embedded with the institutions of the state. We cannot move away from the state as an institution. Many times we need to work in tandem with that institutions of the state to actually make those innovations sustainable and long lasting and meaningful as well. So it is within these characteristics of social innovation, these six characteristics of need satisfaction, empowerment, changing structures, equity to access, scaling up, and embeddedment with state institutions along with the core values and principles of social work that we need to reflect upon what is happening in India. So before going into social innovation in India, we need to also look at the criticisms on this terminology called social innovation and the practice called social innovation across the world. So some summary of that, I would there's a lot of work on that happening now, but I would just give you a brief understanding about what are the criticisms happening to these practices. People say, scholars say, critical scholars say that it is an instrumental pathway for neoliberalism. Actually, Curtis says that neoliberalism is social innovation when it is basically the neoliberalism dressed up as social innovation. So, what is then? Neoliberalism then looks for a profit oriented, market based approach. So, social innovation today, what is getting promoted as social innovation largely are market based approaches to poverty reduction. And there are both yes and no's to this argument. We can see, even if you look at the origins of Kudumbashree, they were market based approach to poverty reduction. Yeah, today you see various other changes. But again, in that, if I make a comment like this, we will have yes and no's for that. Yeah, so is market-based approach to poverty reduction bad? I'm not taking a stand here whether it is bad or good, but what is the intent is very important here. What are the processes followed? That is very important here. Yet another criticism of social innovation is that business motives is getting interweaved into the public policy, where then the social and the social welfare aspect of social development gets reduced, gets weakened. That's very dangerous in that sense. And today you can see that social workers are asked to work in different organizations with a different set of skills. Basically, like the social worker should be capable of developing business development plans, so social purpose business, or the social worker should also be capable of managing social enterprises or social entrepreneur himself or herself. Now, what happens? Yet another criticism is that when social innovation today, from my own experience, when I see here students after working for 4 to 5 years in corporates, they might be engineers, they might be managers, they suddenly get a realization that I am not happy with the job that I am doing, and I want to bring about social change, and I don't want to do social work then. So they immediately come for social work, and they join a social work institution that is offering a master's in social work. But then, when in the interviews, etc., or in the later stages, when we ask them, they will tell that, yes, I want to get into what is called as a startup. I want to come out with an app to address this particular problem. I want to develop this particular software to address this particular problem. I'm not saying there's a wrong. I appreciate the energy and the enthusiasm that the students have. But what along with this is very important is that the critical self-questioning of are we following the ethical codes of practice that usually social workers have to adhere to. Many times in the pursuit of innovations, the ethical codes are not looked into, and this can because largely we are moving towards a market-based approach. So profit, earned income opportunities, all this becomes important. At that context, what is ethical practice that needs a lot of reflection. So, yet another criticism that comes for social innovation is that it is always considered as a panacea for the retrenching welfare state. The state is not doing anything more, so we have to get into it. That is a wrong assumption here. And yet another criticism is that the present day social innovations give importance to the individual and largely focused on technocentrism and rather than the collective and the social structural changes, which also results in new forms of social and territorial exclusion and at the same time the depoliticization of civic life. So now coming to India, what is happening in India? So I did it is a desktop review of few social innovations that were mentioned after independence and then post 1990s. So I could see that the late 1990s, that is even I believe that the Kudumbashree was also formed, set up during 1997 or 98 that time. So before that, if you see in India, there was a different way of social innovation practice, and post 90s, the late 90s, there is an entirely different way of social innovation in practice. So I could see the transitional threshold is somewhere between 95 to 2000, the late 90s largely. which I call as the transitional threshold. And the organizations for our presentation today, I am classifying those organizations between this independence and the 1990s as traditional social organizations, and the late 1990s to present as the modern social organizations. So just look at an analysis of that. So for the desk review, what I took is that the 1950s to 1990s, the traditional organizations were some of these, like Amul Milk Cooperatives, Mahila Griha Udyog, and Barefoot College, Seva, Arvind Eye Care, Lokaya, Lakti, Timbuktu Collective, Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, Tarun Bharat Sangh, Ladakh Ecological Development Group, Navdanya, and National Tree Growers Cooperative Federation. And the late 1990s to 2018, you could see Kudumbashri, Drishti, Unnati, LabourNet, Anudeep, Head Held High, Rural Shows, Agastya, Under the Mango Tree, Bamboo House India, etc. Now, these were randomly picked up, but these were largely picked up because the reports on social innovation had highlighted at different points of time that these were social innovations. So that was one of the key criteria. Apart from this, my interest was also on livelihood as a key sector that I would like to focus. So in that, some of these organizations also fell. So if you look at this particular figure, you could see that from 1945 to 1998, there has been a lot of gaps also in such kind of what we call as innovations. Okay, because what was an innovation in 1956, then we had to wait around 1972 to see another landmark innovation because of the approach, change in institution, etc. But then that terminology called social innovation was also not so mainstream. But later, 1998, if you see, from that onwards, the kind of organizations that exist, which are also termed as social innovations, they are also large in number, or they are clustered together. And very interesting to see that. But when we look at what kind of values the traditional organizations had, you could see that they were largely influenced by the Gandhian approach to rural development, like Sarvodaya, Gram Swaraj, Bhudan, principles of cooperation, self-reliance, etc. And the key value was social innovation with compassion. And social work practice with compassion is very important, but that is what is transitioning today. We need to reflect upon ourselves and ask this question: how many of us social workers do practice with the aspect called compassion? So innovation with compassion is very important. Those innovations during those days were also influenced by Nehruvian notions of scientific temper, with the assumption of taking modern science to grassroots and promoting grassroots innovation. And those organizations and the innovations believed in democratic people's movements, which was also which also drew a lot of ideas and insights from an Indian way of life, and not largely not a Western European centric way of life. And it believed in, and wherever you see collective action experiments which emerged during this period, you could see that their focus was largely on livelihood and ecological security, and largely the fundamental base of these collective action experiments and movements were largely volunteer based. Volunteerism was a key value here, which believed in, respected in local knowledge, and fought for equality and rights based interventions, which strived continuously for equality and rights based interventions. However, I'm not saying everything was rosy during that time. I am only taking these innovations that I have mentioned. But beyond this, if you see, there were a lot of criticisms on the traditional civil society organizations also. But one of the key aspects is these organizations were constrained to innovate further, largely because of funding issues and donors shaping their own agendas, and that led to a few larger constraints in shaping one's own local and indigenous ideologies, and also some of them were influenced by the Western movements. And what happened after 98? If you see the new forms of organizations, a key value that they adhere to is market-based approach to poverty reduction, where economic principle became a key focus, where believing that social change will trickle down. And we could also see they have immense faith in science and technology-based development. You could also see some of the social work colleges abroad, and you will find app-based social work practice as an emerging trend. Some of the apps I have put on the right side also. So then come social workers on par with social entrepreneurs in interaction with venture capitalists, eager to form startups, and they are ready to get into entrepreneurship and risk taking, which earlier we used to see students doing an MBA or Always used to talk about these values, and now you can see even social workers talking about this. And these are also largely there's a lot of funding and a lot of inputs provided to the international financial and development institutions towards this. But a key focus so far has been in that sense is to supply skilled and semi-skilled labor to corporates. What were the needs addressed by traditional organizations? Largely empowerment, changing social structure, striving towards social and ecological justice through equity and access to resources, as well as strengthening advocacy and institutional support to strengthen state-based institutions. At the same time, needs in a neoliberal era is largely ended up in providing skilled human resource or skill development for the corporate, largely legitimized by the state, strengthening job markets thus. Microfinance has emerged as a key area of social work practice. And now, in the last few years, we could also see the playground has transformed to big data. Big data in the field of health, big data in the field of child nutrition, big data in the field of housing, sanitation, etc., where social workers are today being employed to gather informations through technologies such as mobile applications. Is that very important from a compassion and an innovation perspective? I'm not sure, but this is a larger trend. And other areas in the context of livelihood, climate change, etc., you could see value chain development, clean energy mechanisms, etc., also where social workers are, where even organizations are fostering and say claiming it to be social innovation. The focus of social innovation in the traditional organizations, which were largely not-for-profit organizations like NGOs, registered as societies, cooperatives, trust, or trade unions, where livelihood and ecological security of the poor, the marginalized, small-scale farmers, landless farmers, laborers, the vulnerable groups and marginalized groups, including women, from rural and urban areas, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, informal workers in the unorganized sector, and you could also see civil liberties and democratic participation in various fields of practice. There was also, at the same time, you could see binaries in the terms of rural development, urban development, without recognizing the continuum of these rural-urban linkages. Today, we could see that the notion of livelihood security has completely changed to what is called as livelihood promotion, be it microfinance or within the fields of education, health, sanitation, clean energy, and waste management. And they have become women, farmers, and youth are now claimed to be entrepreneurs and not as beneficiaries of something of our interventions. And natural resources and needs both have got commodified here. And today, innovations have created what we call as the urban consumer, who is ready to be at the end of the value chain, accepting the products of the poor. Yeah, so bottom of the pyramid approach has taken a different shape here. And my own understanding is the link between the social, economic, and ecological systems seems to be missing in present-day innovations in India. So what has happened? The earlier innovations were largely transitioning themselves into social movements, where the target groups, people were involved in participatory decision-making and governance of their resources, which also strive towards justice and care facilities, community development, etc. Income generation and livelihood diversification was also a key outcome. But today, social change on many occasions is considered to be a trickle-down effect, while upscaling of institutions and innovations in terms of income generation, diversification of skills and capabilities, capacity development, and strengthening networks of these institutions has become a key focus of the outcome. Structural transformation, I am not sure how far it is able to address as of now. So it is in this context, I am coming to the third phase of my presentation, is that what is the role of social workers here? How do we address, how are we going to work, especially in complex systems? So Dr. Jijo also started with complexity. So complex systems where we are going to work with uncertain, adaptive, dynamic systems. So there are, in my class I tell, when we talk about systems, we move from a simple to complicated to complex to chaotic. A simple system is that, yes, I know what is going to happen. I know what action I have to do. In a complicated system, I have to do certain permutations and combinations. Still, my system is little bit stable compared with the complex system. In complex systems, it's not like that. Every moment, things are changing. Every situation is different. People's decision makings are turbulent, sometimes uncertain. There's a lot of risk prevalent. And then comes chaos. Don't think about chaos. We have only read the complex systems. Even now, when we talk about the pandemic, I believe that we are in a complex system mode. Now, climate change is one of the examples of complex systems. So, weather patterns are changing, knowledge systems are not able to predict what is going to happen next. So, farmers are finding it difficult to plan for their farming practices for the next year, whether there will be rain, whether there will be water, whether the seeds will sprout. In Maharashtra recently, the soya beans that were sowed, that didn't sprout at all. So whether it will sprout. So there are a lot of livelihood and there are a lot of knowledge, risk, and uncertainties associated with complex system and climate. Even let's just focus on one aspect, like one field of practice in social work, that is climate change and sustainable livelihoods. That is the area that I work, striving towards looking at innovation models. So recently, I published a book which details about how adaptive innovation can be one among the pathways to deal with problems that we face in complex systems. So this book is based on, and this model is based on, I shouldn't say the book, but the model is based on what we could say as action research. So Michael Edwards once, he was then the director of Oxfam. He had written about the critique of development studies, and in that he wrote this, that the responsibility of a development practitioner is not only to understand the reality, but also to change it. And I believe that every social worker has has to understand this. We can never understand, not only our research methods and our other methods of practice just helps us to understand the reality, but we should be capable of changing it. Yeah. Now, if that is an understanding, then I believe that action research as a methodology of research and as a method of practice is ideal for bringing about that understanding along with change. Now, here, what is action research? It's a transformative change-making research approach guided by the values of justice, care, and solidarity that is constituted through participatory inquiry and reflective practice. Now, I define adaptive innovation as a people-centered innovation process by the local community actors who are capable of collectively analyzing their own situations in the context of both social and ecological transitions, because I focus on climate change as well, and are forging constructive partnership with other relevant actors to dialogue, ideate, and develop working models that may be with the state, that may be with the private sector, that might be with civil society organizations and community and social workers. Here comes and implement and critically observe, reflect, and validate their adaptive strategies to the emergent context. I'm using a terminology called the emergent context, which I'll explain later. Now, the core of this particular model is these three value systems. And as social workers, I do believe that we need to develop our skills to integrate these three value systems together. That is justice, solidarity, and care. When we talk about justice, we are not only talking about distributive justice. We are not only talking that you don't have food, okay, we will give you food. It is not only those dimensions of justice. We are also asking this question: why is that you are not able to get food? Why is that you are starving? Why is that you are hunger? And what are the structures that are preventing you from accessing food, be it from the public distribution system or be it from what your rights are? And then we get into the structural and procedural understanding of justice. And as social workers, we should strive towards working towards distributed, structural, and procedural forms of justice. But only should we work only for justice? What happens to care then? How will we build relationships of trust? How will we build relationships of empathy? How will we connect people to people through their heart? Yeah, when we talk about passion, when we talk about taking care, caregiving, and care receiving, the notions of care. And when you talk about the notions of care or the ethics of care, feminist social work and feminist theories have really contributed to this understanding of care. So justice, care, and solidarity, the notion of building relationships of trust between networks across groups, and staying when one individual is affected, it feels that the whole group is affected, and then the whole group strives toward the collective. So justice, care, and solidarity comes together, which contributes. We have to not only look at, especially in Indian context and even in the Kerala's context, we have to look for intergenerational equity. What is intergenerational equity? It is not the elders and the present generation alone. We have to look for the younger generation that is coming up, and already there is an older elderly generation that is there. We need to take care of them. That is where you look at justice and care, intergenerational, intersectional, across class, caste, and gender barriers, across disability and other limitations. We need to look at the strengths of those actors as well. And interspecies, today's social work and animal rights or animal justice or non-human social work is also there. So we need to look at interspecies justice as well and ethics as well. So having this as the core of social innovation, we could move. This is the pathway that I have drawn from my experience and my reflections of fieldwork and analysis, but this could vary across different contexts and different situations. For me, I felt that this is a very good model, very good pathway to address complex systems and for a social worker to move ahead. So we begin with situation analysis, understanding what are the vulnerability context of people, what are the dynamics of social ecological systems, and we move further from the situation analysis towards community mobilization. But you cannot, a community is not a community anymore. There are a lot of heterogeneities within communities. Situated actors are there. Perhaps we have to look for women's groups. Perhaps we have to look for youngsters together. Perhaps there are different marginalized sectors, segments within a community. How do we organize, micro mobilize them, develop innovation platforms? And then we get into dialogue ideation. It is during this dialogue ideation we brainstorm with different actors and try to see what their ideas of addressing a particular problem. What are their ideas? I don't want my ideas to go there, but the social worker emerges as a facilitator to facilitate those discussions and dialogues and enable those communities and the groups to ideate. And from those ideations, they should also be given an experience or an image generation. The mental model should emerge where these particular groups are able to frame their action strategies. Only when those images are clear, we should move ahead for piloting. We cannot just organize a community and jump into piloting. We are getting into a lot of, and after the pilot is over, it becomes defunct. Don't get into that. Let's get into an action framing state and move into piloting. And since we are working in a complex systems, we need to also be aware of emergence. So we would have, in a complex system, we would have aimed for a destination A, but what will emerge is a destination B. Be ready to accept the destination B. And here, when I talk about it, I was deeply influenced by Fritjof Capra's work on the hidden systems and his work on emergence, I should say. So sometimes we thought that a particular social enterprise or an organization would have contributed to income generation and thereby empowerment of the people. But halfway through, what we realized is that these organizations, these actors in these organizations did not contribute towards income generation. But what they did is they stopped all those activities and they decided to participate in the elections and they decided to get into local governance. You can see the case of 2020, it is being supported. I remember that when the first time the case of 2020 as a very innovative approach in local governance was projected, the first time when Kitex promoted it, I remember there were a lot of articles saying that it is a social innovation. And today, when you see the election results, I see in some of the same platforms, you can see also criticism saying that this is how corporates enter into public domains and how the discourse can be changed. Now, this is the both sides of the same coin. But here, this is exactly emergencies. Those groups were supposed to be meant for livelihood generation and say income generation, etc. But you see local leadership emerging, women leadership emerging in these processes, new forms of networks and association, new institutions emerging. It may not be always positive also. There can be negative emergence as well. But looking out for emergence is also an important aspect, especially when we believe in complex systems. So working on log frame approaches, etc., for project planning, which will work very effectively in simple systems, that will not work when we look for complex systems. We have to develop models based on action research to work with emergence. So the social worker has an important role in understanding and developing innovation platform. It might be a self-help group, it might be a cooperative, it might be a farmer field school, it might be a farmer producer company, or it might be a youth club. if you see our village libraries that Kerala had at once upon a time, they were wonderful innovation platforms. Yeah, the youth club, arts and sports club of the early late 80s and 90s, they were interesting innovation platforms during that time. So today those have changed because of technological change also. But developing innovation platforms, be it formal or informal, and working through that through the different phases is something very important. So if you see the social work student, apart from understanding the different research methods of be it quantitative or qualitative or mixed, that is what we are getting into, has to be capable of using different methods and methods of research and practice at different phases of our innovation. Be it in situation analysis, you need to be clear about in-depth interviews, oral histories, participatory learning and action. In during micro mobilization, photo voice or community making might help. During action framing, application of different games or participatory prototyping, etc., might be helping. Storytelling is a good strategy during piloting, etc. Or ethnodrama can emerge during emergence. So different methods can be used at different phases of innovation. Yet another important aspect that social workers should be skilled upon today is to analyze their context. The analyzing the context, why I am saying this is each day of practice for us social workers with different actors are different types of social encounters. In these social encounters, we meet actors with diverse values, diverse interest, diverse knowledge, and diverse levels of power. When actors with different actors, be it in a cooperative or in a SHG, when different actors with diverse values, interest, knowledge, and power come together, there can either be discontinuities, social discontinuities, or there can be social innovation. If you reflect on why certain cooperatives, why many of the cooperatives in Kerala have failed, you will understand diverse values between the members and the people who are making decisions, diverse interest between these two actors, diverse knowledge frames. I went to some of the fish workers cooperatives and they were saying that the members of the fish workers cooperatives are active fishers, while the president and secretary are not fish workers, but they are president, they are members of some political party. They have never entered into fishing also. Then what happens here is that their knowledge itself doesn't support one another and the power structures vary. So when values, interest, knowledge, and power with vary across actors, and when they come together, it can either lead to social discontinuities, and at the same time, when all of them align and when they work together, then it can lead to innovations. It can lead to institutional innovation as well as innovations across different actors, like intersectional. Finally, as a social worker, one of the important aspects that we need to ask, and which I ask, in this sense, I should say that I was largely influenced by, Ramana Maharshi and Mahatma Gandhi, etc., is that the questioning about who am I? The reflection is not only the reflection of our action is not only outside to the world as a social worker, but also within, asking this question, who am I? So the reflection with the self, that who am I question, when actors are acting, are asking this question of their actions before an action is started, that is reflection for action, before a project is started. Then when the project is ongoing, reflection in action. When an action is ongoing, asking what is happening, why is this happening, who am I, what am I doing, and then going on reflection on action. After the action is over, after the project is over, what has happened? Today we get into directly impact assessment before even getting into ongoing reflective action. So reflective practice is an important aspect that we need to nurture. If reflective practice is embedded, then we will be able to work with people's needs, their ideas and imaginations, forge collaborations and partnerships, mobilize resources, at the same time nurture and recognize and respect local experiences and multiple knowledge systems, and then we could work together. In a summary, this is the adaptive innovation model, which I described so far. Is the ethical adaptation or the core values becomes the justice, care, and solidarity as the base, and then the different phases, and across the different phases, reflection for action and reflective practice happens. At the same time, we are also capable of analyzing actor interfaces. So I think that I have done my job here, and these are some of the references that I have used for this presentation. Thank you, and I hope that we could have some meaningful discussion.